The gunshot rang through the still morning air like thunder, shattering the peace that had settled over the dusty streets of Chloride, Arizona territory. Dust kicked up from the wooden porch of the general store as Darcy Sullivan dropped to her knees, clutching her father's pocket watch to her chest. Her father lay motionless beside her, blood seeping through his shirt where the bullet had struck. The year was 1883, and Darcy had just witnessed the murder of the only family she had left in the world. "Get the girl," a gruff voice commanded as three men on horseback circled closer. They wore bandanas over their faces, but their eyes revealed their cruel intentions. These were the notorious Clayton brothers who had terrorized the Arizona territory for months. "Pa," Darcy whispered, her voice cracking as she shook her father's shoulder. No response. Her chest tightened as the reality sank in. At 22, she was now utterly alone in a world that showed little mercy to a woman without protection. "I said grab her," the leader barked again, dismounting his horse. "She saw our faces at the bank, can't have no witnesses." Darcy scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding wildly as she backed away. Her blue dress was stained with her father's blood, and tears streamed down her face, cutting clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. There was nowhere to run in the small mining town of Chloride, which had sprung up around silver discoveries in the 1860s. The main street offered little cover, and the three men were closing in. "Please," she begged, though she knew it was futile. "I didn't see anything." The leader laughed, a cold sound that sent chills down her spine. "Too late for that, pretty lady. You're coming with us," and then a single shot cut through the air and the leader's hat flew off his head. The bandits whirled around, guns drawn to face the new threat. "I suggest you boys reconsider," came a steady voice from the shadows of the livery stable across the street. Darcy watched as a tall figure emerged, a rifle balanced expertly in one hand. His other arm, there was no other arm. The empty sleeve of his worn leather coat was pinned neatly at the shoulder. Despite this, he moved with the confidence of a man who feared nothing, his steps measured and deliberate. "This ain't your fight, cripple," snarled one of the bandits, raising his pistol. The one-armed man fired again before the bandit could pull the trigger. The shot was precise, striking the gun and sending it flying from the outlaw's hand. "I believe it is now," the stranger replied, his voice as calm as still water. What happened next was a blur to Darcy. The one-armed man moved with unexpected grace, firing his rifle with deadly accuracy and using his surroundings to his advantage. When one of the bandits rushed him, he swung the butt of his rifle with powerful precision, knocking the man unconscious. Another drew his gun, but the stranger was quicker, kicking a water trough over to provide cover before taking aim again. In less than a minute, two of the bandits lay groaning on the ground and the third had fled on horseback, leaving his companions behind. Darcy stood frozen, her father's body still warm behind her. The stranger approached cautiously, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. As he came closer, she could see his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with weathered skin from years under the harsh western sun. His eyes were a striking blue, set in a face that spoke of both hardship and kindness. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his gaze sweeping over her blood-stained dress. It's not my blood," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper as she glanced back at her father. The man followed her gaze and removed his hat in respect. "I'm sorry about your pa," he said softly. Darcy's legs finally gave way beneath her. The stranger moved quickly, catching her with his one arm before she hit the ground. He held her steady as the tears came in earnest now, her body shaking with sobs. "You're safe," he said quietly, his voice firm yet gentle. "That's all that matters right now." Those simple words, spoken with such conviction, somehow found their way through her grief. She looked up at him, this one-armed savior who had appeared from nowhere. "Who are you?" she asked. "Samuel Irwin," he replied. "Most folks just call me Sam." Darcy didn't know it then, but Sam Irwin would change her life forever, and the dusty streets of Chloride would witness a love story that would become legend in the Arizona territory. By the time Sheriff Jenkins arrived, the two conscious bandits had been securely tied to the hitching post outside the general store. The townspeople had gathered, murmuring amongst themselves about the one-armed stranger who had taken down the Clayton brothers single-handedly. Never seen shooting like that, whispered Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife, and with just one arm. Heard he was in the cavalry, another voice added, lost his arm at Little Bighorn. Sam ignored the whispers, focusing instead on Darcy, who sat numbly on a chair someone had brought out from the store. Dr. Wilson had already pronounced her father dead, and a few men had carried the body to the undertaker's. Darcy felt hollow, as if part of her had died with her father on that dusty street. Sheriff Jenkins, a graying man with a stern face that had seen too much violence, approached Sam. That was quite a display of marksmanship, Mr. Irwin. Just did what needed doing, Sheriff, Sam replied, his tone making it clear he didn't want praise. These two are part of the Clayton gang, Jenkins said, nudging one of the bound men with his boot. Been looking for them for months. Third one's probably Illy Clayton himself. He'll be back, you can count on that. He doesn't take kindly to folks who interfere with his business. Sam nodded grimly. I'll be ready if he does. The sheriff turned to Darcy. Miss Sullivan, I'm mighty sorry about your father. Thomas was a good man. Darcy looked up, her green eyes dull with shock and grief. Thank you, Sheriff. Do you have somewhere to go? Jenkins asked. Any family? She shook her head. No one. Pa and I came out west 5 years ago after my mother passed. It was just the two of us. The reality of her situation was beginning to set in. She was alone in a frontier town with no family, no money, and no protection. Mrs. Peterson stepped forward. She can stay with us for now, Sheriff. Before Darcy could respond, Sam spoke up. Miss Sullivan, I have a small ranch about 3 miles outside of town. It's nothing fancy, but there's a cabin that my ranch hand used before he moved on last month. You'd be welcome to stay there until you decide what you want to do. Darcy looked at him in surprise. Why would you offer that to a stranger? Sam's weathered face softened slightly. Because I know what it's like to lose everything in an instant. He glanced at his empty sleeve, then back at her. The cabin's yours if you want it. No strings attached, Darcy considered his offer. She barely knew this man, but he had saved her life, and there was something in his steady gaze that made her trust him. Besides, she had few options, and the thought of staying in town where every corner would remind her of her father was unbearable. That's very kind, Mr. Irwin, she said finally. I accept your offer, at least for now. Sam nodded as if he'd expected nothing else. We'll leave once you've collected your things. That evening, Darcy Sullivan left the only home she'd known in the Arizona Territory, riding beside Sam Irwin on a chestnut mare he'd borrowed from the livery stable. Her father's body would be buried the next day, and she would return for the funeral. But for now, she needed to escape the sympathetic glances and whispered condolences of the townspeople. They rode in silence for most of the journey, the setting sun casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. Darcy was lost in grief and memories, while Sam seemed content with the quiet. Finally, as they crested a small hill, he pointed ahead. That's it, he said, Irwin Ranch. Before them lay a modest spread nestled in a valley. A small main house stood near a creek with a barn and corral nearby. To the side was a smaller cabin, smoke curling from its chimney. I asked my cook to prepare the cabin for you, Sam explained as they approached. Mrs. Hernandez comes in 3 times a week. She's probably left some food for you. You have a cook? Darcy asked, somewhat surprised. The ranch, while neat and well-maintained, wasn't large enough to suggest such luxuries. A small smile crossed Sam's face. Mrs. Hernandez took pity on me when I first arrived, said a one-armed man would starve to death trying to cook for himself. She's been feeding me ever since. As they rode into the yard, Darcy noticed a man emerge from the barn. He was older with a weathered face and silver hair, dressed in the typical attire of a ranch hand. That's Daniel, Sam said. He helps me with the cattle, only other person who lives here full-time. Daniel approached, tipping his hat to Darcy. Miss Sullivan, welcome to Irwin Ranch. Real sorry about your pa. Thank you, Darcy replied, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. Your cabin's all set, Daniel continued. Mrs. Hernandez left some stew on the stove and fresh bread too. Sam dismounted with practiced ease, then moved to help Darcy down. She hesitated for just a moment before allowing him to place his one hand at her waist, supporting her as she slid from the saddle. Despite his missing arm, his grip was firm and steady. I'll show you to the cabin, he said, leading the way. The cabin was small but clean, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area and a separate bedroom. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting a warm glow over the simple furnishings. "It's not much," Sam said, suddenly self-conscious. "It's perfect," Darcy replied honestly. After the chaos and tragedy of the day, the quiet simplicity of the cabin was exactly what she needed. Sam nodded, seemingly relieved. "Daniel will bring your things. If you need anything, the main house is just up the path. Don't hesitate to ask." "Mr. Irwin," Darcy said as he turned to leave. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did today." Sam paused in the doorway, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the darkening sky. "No need for thanks. Get some rest, Miss Sullivan. Tomorrow's another day." With that, he was gone, leaving Darcy alone with her thoughts and grief. She ate a little of Mrs. Hernandez's stew, which was indeed delicious, then unpacked her few belongings. Among them was her father's pocket watch, now stained with dried blood. She cleaned it carefully, tears streaming down her face as she remembered her father's proud smile when he'd shown it to her that morning, unaware it would be his last day on Earth. That night, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the Arizona night, Darcy wondered what path her life would take now. She had no idea what the future held, but for reasons she couldn't quite explain, she felt safer knowing that Sam Irwin was just up the path. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the Arizona sky a brilliant blue that seemed to mock Darcy's grief. She dressed in her only black dress for her father's funeral, her movements mechanical as she pinned her auburn hair into a simple bun. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Miss Sullivan," it was Sam's voice. "Whenever you're ready, I'll drive you to town." Darcy opened the door to find Sam standing there, dressed in a clean black coat, his usually unruly brown hair combed neatly. He'd clearly made an effort to look presentable for the funeral. "Thank you, Mr. Irwin," she said softly. "Sam," he corrected gently. "No need for formalities." "Then you must call me Darcy," she replied. He nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Darcy it is." The drive to Chloride was mostly silent, both lost in their own thoughts. Darcy noticed how skillfully Sam handled the wagon reins with just one hand, making the difficult task look effortless. She found herself wondering how he'd lost his arm, but couldn't bring herself to ask such a personal question. The funeral was a simple affair. Most of the town turned out to pay their respects to Thomas Sullivan, who had been a well-liked figure in Chloride since his arrival 5 years earlier. Darcy stood dry-eyed at the graveside, having spent all her tears the night before. She felt Sam's solid presence beside her, a silent support that gave her strength. After the service, several townspeople approached to offer condolences and inquire about her plans. Mrs. Peterson invited her to stay in town, and Mr. Johnson, who owned the general store, mentioned that he could use help with his books if she needed employment. "Thank you all," Darcy said sincerely, "but I'll be staying at Mr. Irwin's ranch for now, at least until I decide what to do next." This announcement raised a few eyebrows. Sheriff Jenkins pulled Sam aside while Darcy was speaking with Reverend Clark. "You sure about this arrangement, Irwin?" the sheriff asked quietly. "People talk, you know, a young woman staying at a bachelor's ranch." Sam's expression hardened slightly. "Miss Sullivan is staying in the separate cabin, Sheriff. Her reputation is safe with me." Jenkins nodded slowly. "Never doubted it, just wanted to make sure you understood how it might look." "I understand perfectly," Sam replied. "But I suspect Miss Sullivan has more important concerns right now than town gossip." As they prepared to leave town, Mr. Johnson approached with a wooden crate. "These are your father's personal effects from his desk at the assay office," he explained to Darcy. "And there's some food from the ladies of the church." "Thank you," Darcy replied, touched by the community's support despite her decision to stay at the ranch. On the journey back, Darcy finally broke the silence. "Why did you really offer me a place to stay?" she asked, looking directly at Sam's profile. He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "Like I said, I know what it's like to lose everything." "The war?" she asked gently, gesturing to his missing arm. Sam shook his head. "After, I was a Texas Ranger for a while. Lost my arm going after a gang that had murdered a family near El Paso." He paused, then added, "I also lost my wife and son during that same raid." Darcy's heart constricted at the pain evident in his voice. "I'm so sorry." It was 5 years ago, he said, though his tone suggested the wound was still fresh. I came to Arizona to start over, bought this small ranch, keep mostly to myself. Until yesterday when you risked your life for a stranger, Darcy observed. Sam glanced at her then, his blue eyes intense. Some things a man can't walk away from, no matter how much he might want to. When they returned to the ranch, Darcy found herself strangely comforted by the sight of the small cabin. It already felt more like home than she'd expected. Sam helped her down from the wagon and carried the crate of her father's belongings into the cabin. I need to check on the cattle in the north pasture, he said. Will you be all right here alone? Yes, she assured him. I've been taking care of myself for some time now. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. Mrs. Hernandez will be by tomorrow morning. She's curious about you. After he left, Darcy opened the crate from her father's office. Inside were his ledgers, a few books, and a bundle of letters tied with string. She recognized her mother's handwriting on the envelope's letters her father had kept all these years. Beneath these was a smaller box containing a Derringer pistol. Darcy picked up the small gun, remembering her father teaching her to shoot when they'd first moved west. A woman alone needs to know how to protect herself, he'd insisted. The memory brought fresh tears to her eyes. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, Darcy sat on the small porch of her cabin. From this vantage point, she could see the main house and the surrounding land. It was beautiful in a rugged way, with the mountains rising in the distance and the creek reflecting the golden light of sunset. She spotted Sam returning from the north pasture, riding slowly, his silhouette unmistakable even at a distance. There was something about his solitary figure against the vast landscape that stirred something inside her, a mixture of admiration and curiosity about this man who had saved her life and offered her sanctuary without asking anything in return. As the days passed, Darcy fell into a routine at the Irwin ranch. She kept mostly to herself, sorting through her father's papers and considering her options for the future. Mrs. Hernandez, a plump, cheerful Mexican woman in her 50s, visited regularly, bringing food and conversation. Señor Sam, he is a good man, Mrs. Hernandez told her one morning as they sat drinking coffee. Very private, very sad sometimes, but a good heart. He saved my life, Darcy acknowledged. I owe him a great deal, Mrs. Hernandez smiled knowingly. He does not see it that way. He believes helping others is just what a person should do. Darcy found herself watching for Sam each day, noticing his comings and goings. Sometimes he would nod to her as he passed, occasionally stopping for brief conversation, but mostly he kept his distance, respecting her grief and privacy. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after she'd arrived at the ranch, Darcy decided to walk along the creek that ran through the property. The water was clear and cool, a precious resource in the Arizona territory. As she followed its winding path, she came upon Sam kneeling at the water's edge, washing his face. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing tanned skin and the beginning of a scar that disappeared beneath the fabric. His empty sleeve was unpinned, the fabric hanging loose. Darcy hesitated, not wanting to intrude on a private moment, but before she could retreat, Sam sensed her presence and looked up. Water dripped from his face, and for a moment he looked younger, less guarded. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I didn't mean to disturb you. You didn't, he assured her, standing up and rebuttoning his collar. He didn't immediately pin his sleeve, and Darcy caught a glimpse of the scarred stump where his arm had been. Noticing her gaze, Sam quickly pinned the sleeve. Not a pretty sight, I know. No, Darcy fumbled for words. I was just thinking how remarkable it is that you can do so much with one arm, the way you handled those bandits, the way you managed this ranch. A hint of a smile touched his lips. You learned to adapt, had no choice. Darcy nodded, understanding, like me now. Adapting to life without my father. You're stronger than you think, Sam said with conviction. I've watched you these past weeks. You're grieving, but you're not broken. His words touched something deep within her. No one had ever spoken to her with such straightforward faith in her resilience. Would you walk with me a while? She asked impulsively. I'd like to see more of the ranch. Sam hesitated for just a moment before nodding. I'd be happy to. They walked alongside the creek, Sam pointing out various features of the land. He showed her where the water was deepest, good for swimming in the hot summer months and where wild berries grew along the banks in late summer. How much land do you have? Darcy asked. About 500 acres, Sam replied. Not a large spread by some standards, but enough for me. I run about 100 head of cattle plus a few horses. And you manage all this with just Daniel to help. And Mrs. Hernandez, he added with a smile. Never underestimate the importance of good food to a ranch's success. As they walked, Darcy found herself increasingly comfortable in Sam's presence. There was something reassuring about his quiet strength, his lack of pretense. When they reached a small rise overlooking the valley, they paused to take in the view. It's beautiful, Darcy said honestly. Peaceful. That's why I chose it, Sam replied. After everything, I needed peace. Darcy looked at him, noticing the sadness that still lingered in his eyes when he alluded to his past. Tell me about your wife, she said gently. Sam was silent for so long that Darcy thought he wouldn't answer. Then in a quiet voice, he began to speak. Her name was Elizabeth. We married young, right before I joined the Rangers. She was brave, putting up with my absences, the danger of my job. Our son, James, was 4 when they died. He paused, his jaw tightening. I was away, tracking a gang that had been terrorizing the border towns. They circled back, attacked our homestead. By the time I got there, Darcy instinctively placed her hand on his arm. I'm so sorry, Sam, he nodded, acknowledging her sympathy. I went after them. Caught up with them in a canyon. There was a gunfight. I got most of them, but their leader, he got my arm, left me for dead. His eyes hardened at the memory. I survived, but there wasn't enough left of my arm to save. And the gang leader, Darcy asked. Got away, Sam said, his voice tight with old anger. Raymond Blackwood. I tracked him for a while after I healed up, but the trail went cold. Eventually, I had to let it go or let it consume me. The name sent a chill down Darcy's spine. Blackwood, she repeated. My father mentioned that name. He was investigating some irregularities at the Silver Strike mine just before he was killed. Sam turned to her, suddenly alert. What kind of irregularities? I'm not sure, Darcy admitted. He worked as an assayer testing ore samples. He mentioned something about false assay reports, mines that weren't producing what their owners claimed. The Clayton brothers were likely just hired guns, Sam mused. If Blackwood is involved somehow. Darcy felt a surge of both fear and determination. My father's papers might tell us more. I've been going through them, but I haven't found anything significant yet. Be careful, Sam warned. If Blackwood is behind your father's murder, he's not someone to underestimate. As they walked back to the cabin, a new understanding had formed between them. They had both lost loved ones to violence, and now there was a possibility that the same man was connected to both tragedies. It created a bond that went beyond mere acquaintance or even friendship. That evening, Darcy pored over her father's papers with renewed purpose. Among his personal letters, she found several notes regarding the Silver Strike mine, including mentions of Raymond Blackwood as a major investor. One notation caught her eye. Samples don't match official reports. Be paying off Clayton to silence questions. She showed the papers to Sam the next morning as he passed by her cabin on his way to check the irrigation ditches. This could be why they killed him, she said, pointing to the notation. If my father discovered fraud at the mine. Sam studied the papers, his expression grim. It's possible. The Silver Strike has been producing well, according to reports. Several investors from back east have put money into it recently. Based on false assays, Darcy concluded, my father would have known the real value of the ore if he threatened to expose the fraud. It would give Blackwood motive, Sam agreed, but we need more evidence before taking this to Sheriff Jenkins. Over the next few days, they worked together, examining Thomas Sullivan's papers and discussing theories. Sam rode into town to gather discreet information about the Silver Strike mine, while Darcy organized her father's notes into a coherent case. Working so closely with Sam, Darcy began to see beyond his quiet exterior. She noticed his wry sense of humor, his intelligence, and his unwavering sense of justice. She also couldn't help but notice the physical attraction she felt toward him, the way her heart beat faster when their hands accidentally touched while reviewing papers, or how she found herself watching the strong lines of his profile when he was deep in thought. One evening, as they sat at the small table in her cabin reviewing what they'd learned, a spring thunderstorm broke over the valley. Rain pounded on the roof, and lightning illuminated the room in brief, brilliant flashes. "Looks like I'm staying for a while," Sam observed, glancing out the window at the deluge. "Hope you don't mind the company." "Not at all," Darcy replied honestly. "It's nice not to be alone during a storm." Sam smiled, and Darcy realized it was the first genuine, unguarded smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the lines of hardship and making him look younger. "What?" he asked, noticing her stare. "You should smile more often," she said before she could stop herself. "It suits you." A flash of surprise crossed his face, followed by something warmer. "Haven't had much reason to until recently." The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Darcy felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't look away from his steady gaze. The moment was broken by a particularly loud crack of thunder that made Darcy jump. Sam instinctively reached across the table, his hand covering hers in a reassuring gesture. "Just thunder," he said softly, but he didn't withdraw his hand. Darcy looked down at their hands, his large and weathered, her smaller but equally capable. "Sam," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. "I should check that the windows in the main house are closed," he said suddenly, pulling his hand away and standing up. "The storm seems to be lessening." Indeed, the rain had reduced to a steady patter and the thunder was more distant now. Sam moved to the door, hesitating with his hand on the latch. "Darcy," he said, his back to her. "I'm glad you're here, not just because of the investigation, but I'm glad you're here." Before she could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the rain-soaked night. Darcy stood in the doorway, watching his figure fade into the darkness, her heart pounding with emotions she wasn't ready to name. The next morning dawned clear and fresh after the storm. Darcy awoke early, her mind still full of the previous evening's unspoken possibilities. She dressed quickly and stepped outside, inhaling the clean, rain-washed air. To her surprise, Sam was already up, splitting firewood near the barn. She watched him for a moment, admiring the efficient way he had adapted to working with one arm. He had developed a technique of balancing the log against a special frame he'd built, then swinging the axe with precision. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, wiping sweat from his brow with his shirt sleeve. "Morning," he called. "Good morning," she replied, walking toward him. "You're up early." "Always am," he said with a small smile. "Ranch work doesn't wait for late risers." Darcy noticed he seemed more at ease this morning, as if the previous night's brief moment of vulnerability had somehow lightened a burden he carried. "I've been thinking about our investigation," she said. "I want to go into town today, visit my father's office at the Assay building." "There might be more records there," Sam frowned slightly. "Might not be safe if Blackwood's suspects were looking into him." "I need to do this," Darcy insisted, "for my father." After a moment's consideration, Sam nodded. "All right, but I'm coming with you. Let me finish here and hitch up the wagon." They arrived in Chloride mid-morning. The mining town was bustling with activity, miners coming off their night shifts, merchants opening their shops, and wagons delivering supplies to the various establishments along the main street. The Assay office was a small brick building near the Silver Strike Mining Company's headquarters. Inside, Darcy found her father's desk largely untouched. Mr. Johnson, who managed the general store and acted as the town's unofficial mayor, had locked it up after Thomas's death. "Take whatever you need, Miss Sullivan," he said, handing her the key. "Your father was a good man, honest to a fault. This town owes him a proper accounting of what happened." Darcy thanked him and set to work examining her father's professional records, while Sam kept watch near the door, ostensibly reading a newspaper but alert to any potential threat. After an hour of methodical searching, Darcy found what she was looking for: a hidden compartment in her father's desk containing a small leather-bound journal. Inside were detailed notes comparing official Assay reports with his own findings, along with dates, names, and amounts. "Sam," she called softly, excitement in her voice. "Look at this." He joined her at the desk, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body as they bent over the journal together. "According to this, the Silver Strike has been salting their samples, mixing high-grade ore from elsewhere with their own poor-quality rock to inflate the value," Darcy explained. "My father was tracking this for months." The last entry mentions a meeting he had scheduled with Raymond Blackwood the day before he was killed. Sam's expression darkened. He was going to confront Blackwood directly, and Blackwood had him killed instead, Darcy concluded, anger rising in her chest. We have to take this to Sheriff Jenkins. As they left the assay office, Darcy clutching the journal to her chest, neither noticed the man watching from the shadows of the Silver Strike headquarters across the street. He waited until they entered the sheriff's office, then slipped away toward the livery stable. Sheriff Jenkins listened carefully to their evidence, examining the journal with growing concern. "This is serious business," he said finally. "Fraud of this magnitude. There are a lot of investors who have been cheated, not to mention the territorial government. And murder," Darcy added firmly. "They killed my father to keep this quiet," the sheriff nodded. "I believe you're right, Miss Sullivan. But Blackwood is a powerful man with connections all the way to Phoenix. We'll need to be careful how we proceed." "What do you suggest?" Sam asked. "I'll wire the territorial marshal's office in Prescott," Jenkins decided. "This is bigger than Chloride now. In the meantime, I suggest you both head back to the ranch and stay there if Blackwood gets wind that we're onto him." They didn't need him to finish the thought. The danger was clear. As they left the sheriff's office, Sam placed a protective hand at the small of Darcy's back. The gesture was subtle but spoke volumes about his growing feelings for her. She leaned slightly into his touch, taking comfort in his presence. "Let's get some supplies before we head back," Sam suggested. "Might be best to stay at the ranch for a while until this blows over." They visited Johnson's general store, purchasing flour, coffee, sugar, and other necessities. As they loaded their supplies into the wagon, Darcy noticed Sam scanning the street with increased vigilance. "What is it?" she asked, recognizing the tension in his posture. "Not sure," he admitted. "Just a feeling. Let's get moving." They left Chloride just after noon, the wagon loaded with supplies and Darcy's father's journal secured inside her reticule. The road back to the ranch wound through rocky hills and across a shallow river before opening onto the valley where Irwin Ranch lay. They were crossing the river, the wagon moving slowly through the knee-deep water when the first shot rang out. It splintered the wooden seat between them, missing both by inches. "Get down," Sam shouted, pushing Darcy to the floor of the wagon as he slapped the reins, urging the horses forward. More shots followed, kicking up water around them. Sam kept low, guiding the horses with one hand while drawing his revolver with the other. "How many?" Darcy asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the danger. "At least 3, Sam replied, firing back toward the ridge where the shots originated. "Probably been following us since town." The horses, panicked by the gunfire, surged forward, nearly overturning the wagon as they scrambled up the far bank of the river. Sam fought for control, his face a mask of concentration. "When we reach those boulders," he instructed, nodding toward a formation about 50 yards ahead, "I want you to jump and run for cover. I'll draw their fire." "I'm not leaving you," Darcy protested. "Darcy, please." Sam's voice held an urgency she'd never heard before. "I can't protect you and fight them at the same time, not effectively." Before she could argue further, the wagon wheel hit a rock and snapped, sending the vehicle tilting precariously. Sam reacted instantly, grabbing Darcy around the waist and leaping from the wagon as it began to overturn. They landed hard on the rocky ground, Sam taking the brunt of the impact to shield her. "Run," he gasped, clearly in pain but already pushing himself up. "The boulders, go." This time Darcy obeyed, sprinting toward the rock formation as bullets kicked up dust at her heels. She heard Sam firing back, providing cover for her escape. Reaching the safety of the boulders, she pressed her back against the cool stone, heart pounding in her chest. To her horror, she saw Sam still in the open, pinned down behind the overturned wagon. 3 riders were approaching from the river, spreading out to surround him. She recognized one of them as the bandit who had escaped the day her father was killed, Clayton. Without thinking, Darcy reached into her reticule and pulled out her father's derringer. It was a small weapon with just 2 shots, but it was better than nothing. Steadying her hand, she aimed carefully and fired. The shot wasn't accurate enough to hit any of the attackers, but it was unexpected enough to momentarily distract them. Sam seized the opportunity, firing rapidly and hitting one of the men, who fell from his horse with a cry. Clayton shouted something to the remaining rider, and they split up, one circling toward Darcy's position while Clayton continued toward Sam. Darcy realized she had only one shot left in the Derringer. Making a split-second decision, she left the safety of the boulders and ran to a new position, trying to get a better angle. As she moved, the second rider spotted her and raised his rifle. Sam saw the danger and fired, his bullet striking the man's shoulder. The rider cursed but kept coming, now focused entirely on Darcy. She raised the Derringer, knowing she had to make this shot count, but before she could fire, Sam was there, having sprinted across the open ground with remarkable speed. He tackled the rider just as the man fired, the bullet going wide. They grappled in the dust, Sam at a disadvantage with only one arm but fighting with the desperation of a man protecting someone he cared deeply about. Darcy looked for Clayton and saw him taking aim at Sam's back. Without hesitation, she raised the Derringer and fired her last shot. The small bullet struck Clayton in the arm, causing him to drop his gun with a howl of pain. Sam managed to knock his opponent unconscious with the butt of his revolver. He turned quickly, assessing the situation. Clayton was injured but still dangerous, fumbling for his dropped weapon with his good arm. "Stay back, Clayton," Sam warned, his revolver aimed steadily. "It's over." "Irwin," Clayton spat, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Should have known you'd be trouble. Blackwood said you might be." "So Blackwood did hire you," Sam confirmed, moving closer to Darcy, placing himself between her and the outlaw. Clayton laughed, a harsh sound. "Hired us. He owns us just like he owns half this territory. You think this ends with me? He'll send others." "Not if he's in prison for fraud and murder," Darcy said, stepping up beside Sam. "We have evidence of everything." Clayton's face contorted with rage. With surprising speed, he lunged for his fallen weapon. Sam fired once, the shot echoing across the valley. Clayton fell back, a red stain spreading across his chest. "You should have stayed out of it," Clayton gasped, his voice fading. "Blackwood never forgets, a grudge." Those were his last words. Sam lowered his revolver, his expression grim. He turned to Darcy, his eyes searching her face. "Are you hurt?" "No," she answered, though her hands were shaking now that the danger had passed. "Nothing serious," he replied, though she noticed he was favoring his left side where they'd landed after jumping from the wagon. Sam checked the other attackers. One was dead, the other unconscious but alive. He bound the survivor's hands and feet, then returned to Darcy's side. "The wagon's finished," he observed. "We'll have to walk back to the ranch. It's about 2 miles from here." "What about him?" Darcy asked, nodding toward the bound man. "We'll send Daniel back for him once we reach the ranch," Sam decided. "And for the bodies." They set off on foot, Sam leading one of the wagon horses they'd managed to catch, the other having run off during the attack. They walked side by side, the afternoon sun beating down on them. Despite the heat and the trauma they'd just experienced, Darcy felt a strange sense of clarity. "I shot a man today," she said suddenly. Sam glanced at her, concern etched on his features. "You did what you had to do. You saved my life." "I know," she replied, surprising herself with how steady her voice was. "And I'd do it again. That's what frightens me a little." I didn't hesitate. Sam was quiet for a moment before responding. "There's a difference between being capable of violence when necessary and being a violent person. You're the former, not the latter." Darcy considered his words, finding comfort in them. "Like you," she observed. He nodded slowly. "I suppose so." They walked in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of their footsteps and the horses' hooves creating a soothing pattern. Finally, Darcy spoke again. "When Clayton recognized you, he seemed surprised. Have you encountered him before?" Sam's jaw tightened. "Not Clayton specifically, but now I'm certain Blackwood was behind the attack on my family in Texas. It's too much of a coincidence otherwise." Darcy reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "Then we'll make sure he answers for all of it, for your family and for my father." Sam looked down at their joined hands, then at her face. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a surrender to feelings he'd been holding at bay. "Darcy," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "Don't," she interrupted gently. "Not yet. Let's get through this first. Let's make sure we're both safe." He nodded, understanding, but he didn't let go of her hand as they continued their journey back to the ranch. When they arrived, Daniel was already rushing to meet them, alerted by the sound of gunfire earlier. "What happened?" he demanded, his weathered face creased with worry. Sam quickly explained the situation while Darcy went to check on her cabin, needing a moment alone to process everything that had happened. Inside, she poured water into a basin and washed the dust and sweat from her face and hands. In the small mirror hanging on the wall, she hardly recognized herself. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who had arrived at Irwin Ranch just weeks ago, stronger, more determined, and with a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Sam, his face etched with concern. "Daniel's gone to town to fetch the sheriff and bring back our attacker," he reported. "I've asked Mrs. Hernandez to stay at her sister's in town for a few days until this is resolved." "You think there will be more trouble?" Darcy asked. "I'm certain of it," Sam replied grimly. "Blackwood won't stop until he silences us both." Darcy nodded, accepting this reality. "Then we'll be ready for him." Sam studied her face, a mix of admiration and worry in his gaze. "You're not afraid." "I am," she corrected him. "But fear doesn't mean I'll run or hide. My father raised me to stand my ground." A smile touched Sam's lips. "He did a fine job." Their eyes held for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Sam took a step forward, then stopped himself, his sense of propriety reasserting itself. "I should check the perimeter, make sure we're secure for the night," he said, though it clearly wasn't what he wanted to say. "Of course," Darcy replied, understanding his restraint but feeling a pang of disappointment nonetheless. As night fell, Darcy sat on her porch, a shotgun across her lap, another of her father's possessions she'd brought from town. The valley was quiet except for the occasional lowing of cattle and the chirp of crickets. Stars filled the clear Arizona sky, a vast canopy of light against the darkness. She heard footsteps approaching and tensed, her hand tightening on the shotgun. "It's just me," Sam called softly, emerging from the shadows. "Any sign of trouble?" she asked as he sat down beside her on the porch steps. "Nothing yet," he replied, "but they'll come, probably tomorrow once they realize Clayton and the others aren't returning." They sat in companionable silence for a while, both lost in thought. Finally, Sam spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "After this is over, I want you to know that you're welcome to stay here, not just in the cabin but with me, if that's something you might want." Darcy turned to look at him, surprised by his directness. In the soft moonlight, his features were more relaxed than she'd ever seen them, the hardness that usually guarded his expressions replaced by open vulnerability. "Sam," she began, her heart racing. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" He met her gaze steadily. "I'm not good with words, Darcy, never have been, but these past weeks, having you here, it's like color returning to a world that's been gray for years. I didn't expect to feel this way again, didn't think I could." Darcy felt tears welling in her eyes at the raw honesty in his voice. "I feel it too," she admitted, "but I wasn't sure if it was too soon for both of us." Sam reached out, gently wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Life's too uncertain to wait for perfect timing." Today proved that. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes briefly. "Then yes," she whispered, "when this is over, I'd like to stay, with you." Sam's smile was like sunrise after the longest night, transforming his face with joy. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Darcy responded with a certainty that surprised them both, her hand coming up to rest against his cheek as the kiss deepened. It was a promise, a declaration, a beginning. When they finally parted, Sam rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "We should probably keep watch," he murmured, though he made no move to pull away. "Probably," Darcy agreed with a small smile, equally reluctant to break the moment. Eventually, reason prevailed. They agreed to take turns keeping watch through the night, though neither expected to sleep much. The threat of Blackwood's retaliation hung over them, tempering their newfound happiness with the reality of danger. Morning came without incident, bringing with it Sheriff Jenkins and 2 territorial marshals. They had found the surviving attacker and retrieved the bodies, confirming that the dead men were indeed part of the Clayton gang. "We've got warrants for Blackwood's arrest," Jenkins informed them as they gathered in Sam's kitchen. "Fraud, conspiracy, and now murder. He's barricaded himself in the Silver Strike office with about 5 hired guns. He won't come quietly," Sam predicted, pouring coffee for everyone. "No, he won't," agreed Marshal Wilson, a tall, stern-faced man with graying hair. That's why we could use your help, Mr. Irwin. Sheriff Jenkins speaks highly of your abilities despite your handicap. Sam's expression didn't change at the reference to his missing arm. I'll help however I can. I'm coming too, Darcy stated firmly. All three men turned to look at her in surprise. Miss Sullivan, this is likely to be dangerous, Marshal Wilson began. My father was murdered on Blackwood's orders, Darcy interrupted, her voice steady. I have every right to be there when he's brought to justice. Sam's eyes met hers across the table, a silent communication passing between them. He understood her need for closure, for resolution. She stays with me, he said to the marshal, his tone brooking no argument. I'll ensure her safety. Wilson looked like he wanted to object but thought better of it. Very well, we move on the silver strike at noon. As the law officers prepared to leave, Sam pulled Darcy aside. Are you sure about this? He asked quietly. No one would think less of you for staying here where it's safe. I'm sure, she replied with conviction. I need to see this through, Sam, for my father, for us to truly begin our life together without shadows, he nodded, understanding perfectly. Then we'll face it together. They rode into Chloride just before noon, joining a group of deputies and concerned citizens who had gathered near the Silver Strike Mining Company offices. The building was a two-story stone structure with narrow windows easily defensible, as Marshal Wilson pointed out during their strategy discussion. Blackwood and his men are on the second floor, Jenkins explained. We've evacuated the surrounding buildings. No one gets hurt except the guilty, that's our priority. Sam studied the building carefully. There's a back entrance through the assay room, less guarded potentially. Wilson nodded appreciatively. Good eye, I'll take 3 men around back. Jenkins, you and your deputies cover the front. Irwin, you stay with Miss Sullivan and keep her out of the line of fire. As the others moved into position, Sam and Darcy found cover behind a water trough across the street. Sam checked his revolver and the rifle he'd brought from the ranch. Stay low, he instructed Darcy. No matter what happens, she nodded, her face pale but determined. Be careful, Sam, I just found you, I'm not ready to lose you. The simple honesty of her words struck him deeply. He reached for her hand, squeezing it once before returning his attention to the building across the street. Marshal Wilson's voice rang out, amplified by a speaking trumpet. Raymond Blackwood, this is United States Marshal Wilson. You're surrounded and under arrest for fraud and murder. Come out with your hands up and you'll receive a fair trial. The response was a volley of gunfire from the upper windows, forcing everyone to duck for cover. The battle had begun. For the next hour, gunfire echoed through the streets of Chloride as Blackwood's men exchanged shots with the lawmen. 2 deputies were wounded, though not seriously, and one of Blackwood's gunmen was seen falling away from a window, presumably hit. This isn't working, Sam muttered, his expression grim. They're too well fortified and they have the high ground. Darcy surveyed the situation, her mind working quickly. The mining company keeps blasting powder in the storage shed behind the building, she said suddenly. My father mentioned it once, said it was a dangerous practice. Sam looked at her with newfound respect. If we could create a diversion. Exactly, Darcy agreed. Not enough to harm anyone seriously, but enough to draw their attention away from the front entrance. Sam considered the plan, then nodded. It could work, but I'll need to get to that shed without being seen. I'll create a distraction, Darcy offered. Absolutely not, Sam replied firmly. It's too dangerous. I wasn't asking permission, she said with a small smile. Besides, I'll be perfectly safe. All I need to do is get their attention for a few moments. Before Sam could protest further, Marshal Wilson crawled over to their position. We're at a stalemate, he reported in frustration. Blackwood knows we can't risk setting fire to the building with all the business records inside their evidence. Sam quickly explained Darcy's idea about the blasting powder. Wilson listened intently, then nodded his approval. It's risky, but it might work. What kind of distraction did you have in mind, Miss Sullivan? Darcy smiled, a plan already forming. Just follow my lead in about 5 minutes. Despite Sam's concerns, Darcy's distraction was both effective and relatively safe. She borrowed a deputy's hat and coat, making herself look like another lawman from a distance. Then, moving to a different position, she fired several shots into the air while shouting orders as if directing a new group of deputies. The ruse worked. Several of Blackwood's men redirected their fire toward Darcy's position, giving Sam the opportunity to sprint to the storage shed unnoticed. Inside, he found several crates of blasting powder used for mining operations. Working quickly, he prepared a small, controlled charge enough to create a loud bang and some smoke, but not enough to cause serious structural damage. Setting a short fuse, Sam left the shed and returned to his position near Darcy, just as Marshal Wilson and Sheriff Jenkins launched a coordinated assault on both entrances of the building. The small explosion detonated seconds later, creating the desired distraction as smoke billowed up behind the building. In the confusion that followed, the lawmen breached both entrances. Gunfire erupted inside the building, then fell silent after several tense minutes. Sam and Darcy waited anxiously until Marshal Wilson appeared at the front door, waving them forward. "We got him," Wilson announced as they approached. "Blackwood's alive, 2 of his men are dead, the rest surrendered." Inside, they found Raymond Blackwood seated on a chair, his hands bound behind his back, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. He was older than Darcy had expected, perhaps 50, with cold eyes and an aristocratic bearing despite his current circumstances. When he saw Sam, recognition flashed in those cold eyes, followed by hatred. "Irwin," he spat. "Should have finished you in Texas." "So it was you," Sam replied, his voice deadly calm. "You ordered the attack on my family," Blackwood sneered. "Your wife was collateral damage. You were the target too close to uncovering my operation in El Paso. When you survived, I figured you'd learned your lesson. Clearly, I was wrong." Darcy stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "And my father, was he collateral damage too, Thomas Sullivan?" Blackwood said with contempt. "Another self-righteous fool who couldn't mind his own business. Yes, I ordered his death, just like I'll order yours once I'm free." "You'll never be free again," Marshal Wilson interjected. "The evidence against you is overwhelming. Fraud, conspiracy, multiple murders across territorial lines. You're looking at hanging Blackwood." As the marshals led Blackwood away, Sam turned to Darcy. The vengeance he had sought for 5 years was finally within reach, but looking at her face, he realized that revenge mattered less to him now than the future they could build together. "It's over," he said softly. "He can't hurt anyone else now." Darcy nodded, tears of relief and grief mingling as she leaned against him. "Justice for your family, for my father." Sam wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. "For both," he agreed. "Now we can look forward instead of back." The trial of Raymond Blackwood was swift by frontier standards. With evidence from Thomas Sullivan's journals, testimony from the surviving Clayton gang member, and witnesses from both Arizona and Texas, he was convicted of multiple counts of fraud and murder. 3 weeks after his capture, he was sentenced to hang. Darcy and Sam attended the sentencing together, their hands intertwined as the judge pronounced the verdict. Neither took pleasure in Blackwood's fate, but both felt a sense of closure as the man who had caused so much pain was finally held accountable for his crimes. As summer turned to fall in the Arizona territory, life at Irwin Ranch settled into a new rhythm. Darcy moved from the cabin to the main house after Sam made an honest proposal one evening under the stars. They were married in a simple ceremony in Chloride, with Sheriff Jenkins, Daniel, Mrs. Hernandez, and many townspeople in attendance. Mrs. Peterson made the wedding cake, and Mr. Johnson closed his store early for the occasion. Even Marshal Wilson returned from Prescott to congratulate the couple whose courage had brought down one of the territory's most dangerous criminals. After the celebration, as they rode back to the ranch as husband and wife, Darcy looked at the man beside her with a heart full of love and gratitude. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked. "When you rode into Chloride that day and saw me in trouble?" Sam smiled, the haunted look that had once dominated his features now rarely seen. "Never," he admitted. "I was just doing what needed to be done, wasn't looking for anything in return. And yet here we are," Darcy said, leaning against his shoulder as the wagon rumbled along the familiar road. "Here we are," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I still maintain that you're the brave one, facing down bandits, standing up to Blackwood, agreeing to marry a one-armed rancher." Darcy laughed, the sound carrying across the valley. "The bravest thing I ever did was open my heart again after losing my father, and you did the same after losing even more." As they approached the ranch, the setting sun painted the mountains gold and purple. It was a sight Darcy never tired of this land that had become home in ways she hadn't thought possible when she first arrived. Sam helped her down from the wagon, his touch lingering longer than necessary. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irwin," he said softly. "I've been home for some time now," she replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "Ever since a one-armed cowboy fought off some bandits and told me I was safe." Sam smiled against her lips. "That's all that mattered then," he murmured. "But now so much more matters, so much more," she agreed. Together, they walked toward the house, toward their future, the shadows of the past finally behind them. Years later, the story of how Sam Irwin had faced down 3 bandits with one arm to save the woman who would become his wife was still told in Chloride and the surrounding communities. Some versions embellished the tale, adding more bandits or more dramatic details, but Darcy and Sam never bothered to correct them. They were too busy living their own story, raising their 2 children, James and Thomas, named for those they had lost, expanding the ranch into one of the most successful in the territory, and building a life filled with the love neither had expected to find again. Each night as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Sam would take Darcy's hand in his, a gesture that never lost its meaning over the decades they spent together. And sometimes, when the memory of that first day in Chloride came to mind, he would lean over and whisper, "You're safe. That's all that matters." And Darcy would smile, knowing it was true, but also knowing that safety was just the beginning of what they had found together in the wild Arizona territory.